Today, we're looking at Isaiah chapter 27. This chapter is going to break down into 4 parts that I'll cover individually. The first part is going to cover a single verse, and we're going to talk about Leviathan. Then we have verses 2 through 6, where we will speak of the vineyard. Verses 7 through 11, we will talk about throwing down a false altar, and then verses 12 and 13, the gathering and the return. But today's video, we get to talk about Leviathan. So let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Gilgamesh. And we're talking about just this great subject of Leviathan. Leviathan, the mighty sea monster. There is a cylinder seal from Tel Asmar that shows Baal overcoming Lotan and Yam. These are probably inspirations for the biblical Leviathan. Lotan is this multi-headed dragon. He lives inside of Yam, which is the word for the sea, which is also a personified deity of chaos. In this, he uses 2 particular weapons to attack these monsters, striking both the back and the head. And we have some detail on that we find in the Ugaritic texts that have been preserved. Baal uses these 2 special weapons to defeat Yam, these 2 clubs, one to strike his back and one to strike his head. If we were to look at a different portrayal here, to modernize, this might appear to depict the same 7-headed dragon that you hear of in the New Testament in Revelation. The kneeling warrior who has already severed the beast's lowest drooping head could represent Michael. But this precedes the book of Revelation by 2,500 years. It is a 1.5-inch shell that has an inlay carved into it here, which comes from Mesopotamia and dates to the Sumerian early dynastic period, about 2,800 to 2,600 BCE. It's believed to illustrate the Sumerian deity Ninurta, who is slaying the 7-headed serpent Mus-Sog-Imin. The plaque, which is housed actually now in the Bible Lands Museum of Jerusalem, shows Ninurta, the son of the divine king Enlil, who is the protagonist of several Sumerian myths, which portray him as this heroic figure here. There's always a terrible monster that is taking over the world and threatening the kingdom of heaven, and nobody can oppose it until this young prince Ninurta is sent against him, and then Ninurta confronts the beast on a mountain and slays it. And then he returns back to his celestial home, where he receives a place of honor beside his father. In one of the myths, Ninurta creates a new world after this victory. Another describes his triumphal return to heaven with the 7-headed snake among his trophies. So this idea of this multi-headed dragon that is to be defeated is a common theme throughout the ancient world in several of the surrounding cultures. It's not clear how much the Israelites themselves would have believed this to be a literal creature that you might actually run into when you're out sailing, or if this were simply a figurative or mythological figure. The fact is, there's a lot of weird things you can run into when you're sailing, and on the little small boats they had, it had to be somewhat terrifying. But we don't know, and they certainly had no great understanding of what kind of creatures lurked beneath the water. And there were many terrifying ideas around what those could be. So they may have thought of this as a literal being that was out there in the sea waiting for them, or they may have understood it simply as a symbol of chaos and destruction. Now, I have a friend on Discord whose name is Tannen, sea monster, and he actually brought to my attention another paper that was published in 2021 in Vetus Testamentum, and it is by Aaron M. Wilson Wright and John Hoonergaard. And it was published 1st of July 2021, entitled How to Kill a Dragon in Northwest Semitic. And he makes 3 linguistic observations regarding Ugaritic, Lotan, and the Hebrew Leviathan. And here he talks about how in the Ugaritic tablets that we have, there is a definite reference to Lotan, who we believe is the same as Leviathan. And he goes through some of the linguistics of why we believe those 2 words come from the same origin. But he talks about this section and its very close similarity to Isaiah 27:1, particularly the words that we are translating as twisting and fleeing appear in this same text. It is his assertion that in at least the second case, this is a proper name of an actual serpent being. And so it may be referring to both Leviathan and another name that is possibly an apposition for Leviathan, but a second proper name for him that we're translating as twisting serpent. The word for serpent, which is nachash in Hebrew, in Ugaritic is batnu, and otherwise, though, the text is pretty similar to what we have in Isaiah. There's clearly some influence between the texts. But let's take a look at the text. What does the text say? We start out with the introductory statement. In that day, the Lord will visit with his hard and great and strong sword. We have these three strong adjectives here for the Lord's sword: his hard, his great, and strong sword. So we're really talking about the power of his weapon, and this makes sense because in the other mythologies, the weapon of the deity played a very important role in defeating the monster. And I think that it is significant that we have three adjectives for the Lord's weapon, and then we have three lines that follow. The three lines that follow are, upon Leviathan the fleeing serpent, upon Leviathan the twisting serpent, and he will slay the sea monster that is in the sea. The fact that this verse here starts out with, on that day, means that this might be the beginning of a new prophecy, and certainly it was interpreted that way because we ended the last chapter and brought this one to the beginning of a chapter here. But the previous chapter ended with several verses about resurrection. There's nothing in those verses that really seems to have anything to do with the sea or sea monsters or anything that would make a lot of sense to make this connected to the verses that come before it, although some have tried. What follows is an agricultural tale about a vineyard. And again, no strong connection to the sea or sea monsters. And so it appears that this verse pretty much stands on its own. It doesn't seem connected to the material before it or the material after it. It looks like it is itself an independent fragment. Well, we have a couple of words that describe Leviathan here. The name Leviathan occurs twice, which is something that Paper believes may have been an error, that putting the second Leviathan into this may have been a result of not understanding that the second line was actually an alternative name for Leviathan. Not sure I'm convinced on that one. I think that it reads better as a parallelism with Leviathan in there twice, but it's hard to say. But Leviathan here is described as the fleeing serpent and the twisting serpent. Well, the fleeing serpent, you'll also see translations calling it the slippery serpent. The fact is we don't know what it is. The Hebrew word is bariach, and it's not certain what its meaning would be. It could derive from a verbal stem that means to flee and thus be slippery and slide away. It is also an ordinary word for the bolt of a gate and could conceivably refer to the serpent held under lock and key, but we're not sure. In general, fighting the serpent is often associated with creation, and the serpent is something that must be defeated in order to allow the dry land to appear. This seems to be the case in the Hebrew Bible in a lot of cases. However, we are in a section of Isaiah that is often known as the Apocalypse of Isaiah, and some interpret this verse, especially with it starting off in that day, as being a future event, and this being a eschatological or end time event. And so perhaps it is trying to bring in creation imagery into the idea of the end time, as we know that there is the idea of creating a new heaven and a new earth in this eschatological view. But normally the fight with the serpent is seen as a creation ideal. Notable apocalyptic literature that is often cited in connection with this, of course, would be the beasts in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, that emerge from the sea. Also in the New Testament, Revelation chapter 13 speaks of a seven-headed beast coming from the sea, clearly inspired by Daniel and possibly connected to this theme here. The description of Leviathan as being a multi-headed beast is actually biblical as well. We see in Psalm 74:14 that Leviathan is mentioned as having heads, plural. And so there is a lot of connection between these. Now, the other word that is used to describe the serpent here is a calaton. And this has been translated as wriggling, as squirming, as coiling, but the same word is used in Ugaritic, and this is the one that Wilson Wright and Hunegard have suggested is actually a proper name, the serpent akalaton, which in the Ugaritic is Bantu akalatanu. And so that's it. We have this great story of the serpent being destroyed by the sword of the Lord, and it seems to just stand on its own. Based on what we know, this was viewed as a multi-headed serpent. It was something that was well understood in the surrounding mythologies, and here it has been adapted to Israelite mythology as well, and appears to be an event that will happen at the end of days. And that will do it for this first section on Isaiah chapter 27. Please like and subscribe and ring the bell, and I will see you on the next one.